I've used a lot of static code analysis tools before, but this one's different. Stay tuned while Igor Wojda and I take a tour through Konsist. When I first heard about Konsist, I said, why do we need another static code analysis tool for Kotlin? We've already got detect, we've already got KT-lint, so what is it that this one's going to offer us? But once I dug into it, I realized that there is a lot of neat stuff that you can do with this one. So to help demonstrate some of the cool things that you can do with Konsist, I'm joining forces today with Igor Wojda. Hello, Igor, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks.
Thank you for joining me today. I think everyone who's been active in the Kotlin or Android communities for a while probably has heard your name at one time or another. You've been involved in both communities for a long time. You were a very early adopter of Kotlin. And I know you've written a lot of articles, you've written a book, you're active on social media. And with this project, with Konsist in particular, you've been involved with this since the beginning. This is your project. So tell me a little bit about how you got started with this and the motivation for creating Konsist.
Yeah, so this is my child project, I think second or third open source project. The motivation for this one, this was the tool that I was always missing when I was working on all those Android projects over the years. So we have detect currently that can verify code complexity, so we can check things like does the method have too many return statements, or does the constructor has too many parameters, right? We have KT-lint that allows us to verify code formatting. So for example, we can make sure that there is a new line at the end of the file, or that there is a space between a variable declaration and variable name, things like that. But one thing that I was always missing was a way to check the code structure. So for example, you wanna verify if the use case class has single method. You may wanna verify also that the method name is invoke or execute. You may also on top of that verify that it has the Kotlin invoke operator. So kind of those structural rules that would be valid across entire code base and verified in automated manner together with PRs. So this was something that was always missing. I think a lot of developers will appreciate that, because usually when you join the project, the code base is messy. You open one view model or one repository, then you open another, and it has totally different structure, totally different naming. So it's sometimes very difficult to figure out what's going on, and it's difficult to say which solution is the right one. So I've seen projects where you had 4 ways of parsing data from network. And it's very difficult, and it's time consuming to actually process this mentally. If the code base would be unified, it would be much better for all of us.
Yeah, you can end up with what I've heard somebody call pattern scatter before, where you end up with a couple different ways of, like, a couple different patterns for solving the same problem. And so I think Konsist can be a good tool for helping to make sure that everything's done in a consistent way.
Yep.
I, for one, have worked on a number of projects where I think I really wanted to have a tool like this, and I didn't realize it, if that makes sense. There were things where I was like, well, I would love to make sure that our view models are named consistently, or like our parameters and properties named consistently. But in order to do that, I was going to have to write an IntelliJ plugin, for example, where I'm writing my own inspections and stuff, which is okay, but a lot of times I was like, well, the effort on that probably isn't really worth it. So I just shrugged it off and moved on and never got around to it. But I think Konsist really, it finds a new niche for static code analysis. And so you really piqued my interest on this one when I first saw you post about it. So I was really excited. I was like, I've got to get Igor on here and talk through some of the neat use cases that exist for this thing. So I've never developed a code quality tool before, and I would imagine that when you're developing a code quality tool, that code quality is important to that project itself. So tell me a little bit about what you and the other contributors on Konsist are doing to keep code quality in the Konsist project itself. Like, how do you make sure that it's going to be as bug-free as possible?
Yeah, so first of all, we use Konsist to verify Konsist code base.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so we have a lot of Konsist tests there. We actually heavily rely on testing. So this comes from mainly from two facts. So one is that we used Kotlin library to parse the code into code source code tree and get those declarations. And we want to make sure that the library will be compatible with Kotlin 2.0. So we, I would say, a little bit even over test, but we have multiple level of tests. Just to give you the idea, with the release, we run usually around 30 types of checks. So we have separate projects that we use to test to make sure that certain features are working within a consist. We are generating even libraries to make sure that the integration works as expected. We are verifying consist artifacts to make sure that the right dependencies are delivered with Konsist, as well as Konsist libraries released with correct JVM bytecode version. We have integration tests. We mock some stuff. So basically, there is a lot of tests in this project.
And is this one a multi-platform project, or is it JVM only, or?
So the project itself is JVM only in terms of the project, but you can use Konsist with multi-platform Kotlin projects, with Spring projects, with Android projects. Basically, everything that has Kotlin files within it will work with. Currently, we support Gradle build system and Maven, together with popular testing tools like JUnit 4, JUnit 5, and recently we added support for KO test. So we try to integrate the ecosystem. We try to do it in a way where it's really friendly for developers, and we really try to make it very easy to use, as easy as possible.
I know Konsist is a relatively new project. I think it was maybe April or May this year that the first commit was on GitHub. Is that right?
Yeah, it's quite new project. So we are still in this preview stage of the project. So the reason for that is we want to grab as much feedback from the community as possible to make sure that we will tweak all the edge cases and add the features that are required. So to be completely fair, we expected that we will get a lot of bug reports, but mostly everything is working if people want to have new features. So we are mostly focusing on adding new stuff to the Konsist. So the testing that we mentioned, like really the testing approach really worked well for us.
Well, that's encouraging when you don't get as many bug reports as you're expecting.
Honestly, I was expecting that people will be complaining, but, but it's totally opposite.
And it seems like it's had a lot of adoption already. I saw the star chart for like how many people have started the project on GitHub, and it's really taken off recently. And so I know some developers are a little cautious about introducing when there's like a relatively new tool or library. They might hesitate to put it in their production projects because, it can add new risk. But tell me a little bit about like this project. Is it ready, even though it's in kind of this preview stage? Is it ready for adoption?
Yes, it's totally ready for adoption because this is the project that is not delivered with the application. So it's a project that is added to test code base, test source sets. So this is never released for users. This is only like targeting developers. That's why even if something is wrong with the Konsist, worst case scenario, one test will not work for you, but it will not affect the production app.
Well, I'm excited here. I've got a little project that we can start stepping through. So let me pull that up here. So this one is a Spring project. It's a REST service. It returns a list of stories. So we've got a very basic setup for a Spring project. We start with the controller, which is the endpoint, the main entry point for the project over web services. From here, we call into this story service class, which just allows you to do a little bit of sorting. A lot of times this is where we'd have our business logic, not very complex logic here today. And then from the story service, we call into a data store. Let's go down to the implementation here. To make things simple, I just created a CSV file and loaded them into memory. So we're not actually even talking to a database here, but this will give us a chance to explore things. In addition to the controller, the service, and the data layer, we also have the models, which are kind of shared everywhere. And you can see we've just got a story that's got a title and an author. That's what gets returned. I went ahead and created value classes for the title and the author, and we've got another one for publication year. So that's the overall structure of this little service. Maybe a good place to start is just introducing the Konsist library into this project.
Yep, sounds like a good idea. So the first step would be to add the Konsist dependency to the project. So I copied this from Konsist rep or Konsist documentation. So now we need to sync the project.
And like you said, this is going in the test implementation, which keeps it out of the main production code.
Yes, exactly. There are actually multiple ways of adding Konsist to the test. So this is the simplified version where we add Konsist to the test source set. However, the better way would be to create a dedicated source set called Konsist test using Gradle plugin. The Konsist documentation covers this case. Thanks to that, you would have like tests separated from Konsist tests, maybe even from integration tests, so that your code base will be even cleaner. For Android, it's not possible to add new source sets, so usually I would recommend to create a dedicated module to make sure that those tests are separated from everything else.
That's great. Okay, I didn't realize that was an option. That's really cool. Okay, well, with that, we've got the dependency loaded in to the project, so we can come into this test folder here, and I'll create a new file here, and should I just call this consist test?
Yeah, we can start with Konsist test for now. I usually over time call them like, repository Konsist test or like controller Konsist test, depending how the project grows and what is the need.
Yeah, okay. I was kind of curious how you normally would do that, if you would split up your consist tests into the different packages, or do you keep them all in one? But it sounds like a separate source set even, keep them entirely separate.
Yeah, because the reason why I go with separate source set is that I like this separation. So for example, if I run CI checks, right, what a lot of projects are doing, they run all the checks at once, versus for me, I prefer to separately run tests, separately run Konsist tests, separately run detect and other tools, because when my PR is failing, I can open the PR page and I instantly see which part has failed, rather than I need to like open this check that failed and go through extremely long log line and try to find an error and figure out which tool has failed. It's just personal preference, but it worked quite well for us.
Yeah, okay. Oh, great. Well, now that we've got the test in place, I guess I can show you a few things that I'm interested in doing to improve the quality of the project. So I'll go up here to the story controller. You can see the return type on this all stories function is a list of story. And a lot of times in my service projects, I don't like the idea of returning a collection type, because then the result from calling over HTTP is going to be a JSON array. And the reason that's not always good is if we want to add anything to that root object, if we wanted to say, for example, add how many total pages this has, or like where you go to get to the next page, or how many results are on each page, that kind of information, we couldn't put it anywhere, because with an array you're just stuck with what you got. So what I want to do here is I want to make a rule for this project and say that all of the public controller functions need to return something that's not a collection type.
Let's do that.
Yeah, let's see what we can do for that.
Let's see what we can do. Yeah, exactly. So we open our Konsist test file, right? And we write a test. So one thing to mention here is that Konsist tests are written in form of unit tests. So it's basically a unit test within the Konsist library. So we obviously start with test annotation. So we have the test library. So we add the test annotation and write the function. So as a function name, we can put descriptive name for the Konsist test, as usually we do for tests. So we wanted to write controllers, test for controllers, never returning collections, right?
That sounds good.
So the entry to the Konsist framework is the Konsist class, or actually Konsist object. So we basically start by creating the scope. The scope is representing the certain set of project files. So in that case, we want to create a scope from package. For this, we want to create a scope probably from controller package, depending on the project configuration. So we can either type story.controller, and this would create the scope. So this scope means all of the files, Kotlin files that are within the package will be verified. However, for practical reasons, we want to add 2 dots at the end which means that all of the sub packages will be included as well. So this is very good approach for growing projects where, as number of controller grows, you may introduce additional package, so this test will still work. Another step is to actually verify. We have a verify classes, so we will query all of the classes. Now we wanna verify a very specific class. So if you look at the controller, so the question is, how would you recognize that this class is a controller, right? So you have few ways. So one, you could use like this controller class name suffix to get the controllers. However, usually for the Spring, the controllers controller annotation would be a better way to go, as this uniquely identifies all of the controllers within Spring application. So we want to query all of the classes that have a REST controller annotation. So we can say with annotation, and here as an argument we would pass the REST controller. So now when we have those classes with the annotation, we will be verifying functions, right, or methods within this class. So we will use another Konsist API function called functions. So now we will have to write the final step of the Kotlin test, the assertion. We want to verify the function return type. Do that. It will be fine. So this way we will verify whether or not our method is returning the collection. So let's run this test and see what will happen.
Great, okay. So it failed, which is what we wanted it to do. Let me pull out the run tool to its own window so we can see more of this error message. Looks like we get a KO assertion failed exception with the name of the test function here, telling us that it was violated one time. And then it includes the exact point where the violation occurred here in the story controller. And over here it shows us the name of the violating function. Good deal. So I guess now I can go in and fix the problem. I'll just say, I'll do a class here. Actually, we'll do a serializable. So we can make it a data class, right? Class, and we'll say stories representation, and we'll just take the stories, and then we can return it from here. And we'll need to make sure we update the return type there. And that looks good to me.
See?
Hey, look at that. That's great.
Okay, so the good thing about this test is that it's not only works for this controller, but all of the controllers within story.controller package. So every future classes that you will add to your project will be guarded by this rule, which means if new developer joins the team and doesn't realize that this is the way to do things, the test will fail. On top of that, it's worth mentioning that every assertion has a additional message parameter where you can specify string message that will be displayed. So for example, don't use Kotlin collection types, right? So maybe we can make it more descriptive for more advanced tests, but the idea here is that you can provide more information when test is failing. To be specific, you can provide some guidelines or instructions on how to fix the particular problem.
Really, this kind of reminds me of some of the collection processing functions that are just part of the standard API. From the time that we do consist dot, we get the scope from the package, and you're just kind of like refining that as you go. So it's kind of like your dot filter, dot map, that kind of an idea here where you're refining that list of declarations really down to just the pieces that you want, right?
Yep. So we can, at a high level, Konsist test is composed of 3 steps. So first step, you create the scope, you define list of files on which the check should be checks. Then you query this a little bit more by selecting, for example, certain classes, and then you can select even more things like functions. And at the end, you provide the assertion to verify the requirements.
Well, this is great, man. We've got our first one down. I've got a few other test cases that we could introduce if you're up for it.
Yep. Let's improve the code base.
All right, let's keep going. Let's see. All right, let me open up the models package here. And I've got this data class. Data classes are, of course, useful for adding an equals, a hash code, a toString function for you and all that. But it only works on the properties that are declared in the constructor, like right here. So if you declare a property in the body, like is available to read, that's not actually going to be used in the equals or hash code or toString. So one thing I think for this project I'd like to do is make a rule that data classes are not allowed to have a body property.
So let's start by adding another test. How should we name it? So let's name it all data classes properties are defined in constructor. So, right, in constructor. So as before, we start with consist. You can either select a package. However, like certain rules may be, project general. So Konsist has this method like scope from project, which allows you to include all of the Kotlin files within the project. So which one do you prefer?
Pull it from the module, you think, or from the package?
So to be honest, like depends from the project to the project how you structure your architecture. We can go from model here as well. So we can copy this code, and we can do that, right? And now we want to also select the classes, but this time we will use different methods to query those classes or to filter them, because this time we want to use classes with the data modifier, right?
That's right.
Modifier, and we have KO modifier. Select the data. So this will query all of the data classes within story.model package and all of the sub packages.
Oh, looks like we might have imported the wrong one actually. Let's come back here. Should be with modifier, is that right?
Yep. So we have it. So now from those data classes, obviously we wanna query all of the properties. Write an assertion. And on each property, we want to verify if the property is defined inside the constructor. So we have this nice consist method to verify that. So hopefully we run this test and it will fail.
It's nice that you've got a property already set up for that one.
Yeah, so we didn't have it initially, so this was like added as a part of the feedback. Part of someone said, "Oh, it would be nice to have it." So we realized, yeah, very good idea.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, this is how we improve this library. Like the community-driven feedback is actually all we need, like something that we need at this time, because we try this on every project we can, but the reality comes we can create the great tool, but the way users will use it will always surprise us, and we've seen some nice surprises, some nice tests that we didn't expect it before.
I bet, yeah. Well, great. We can go in here, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this entirely, since I don't actually need that, and we'll give it another run. And we got the green bar. All right.
We are safe.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, what else do you get?
Let's see. So still here in this models file, I have a number of these value classes, and you can see I've got with the title, I've got value as the name of the property. Under author, I've got author as the name of the property, and publication year's got year as the name of the property. And I'd like to standardize on all that so that anytime you have a value class, the underlying property is just going to be .value.
Yeah, this is definitely doable with Konsist. So let's write another test. Value property. So this is one of those rules that definitely should apply for entire project. So we'll use a different scope here. As you can see, like we can create scopes from directories, modules, individual files. So it's the API is quite flexible. And now we wanna again select the classes. But this time I will show you a better way of querying the classes with modifiers. So also in our API we can also say explicitly with value modifier. So the reason why you have multiple ways of doing the same thing is that sometimes you wanna query classes that have multiple modifiers. Maybe they have data modifier and internal modifier, or even more. Actually, I was testing once how many modifiers you can add to a function, and I think it's around 10. So
Oh, wow.
it's extreme edge case in Kotlin, but it's doable.
That's pretty funny. By the time you get done writing all those modifiers, your your actual code's going to be all the way off the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we wanna check if the property name is the value, right? So we will say, so we'll query properties again and say int name equals value. Right. So let's run our test.
All right.
Yeah.
And this is fun because it shows we've got two failures here. We've got both the author and the year. So I'll go ahead and rename these. Give it another run. All right, looks good. Well, let's see, I've got another one in this models file where you can see we've got the serializable annotation on story, title, and author, but publication year isn't actually used yet. But any classes that are in this models package, I'd love to have a rule that says we need to make sure we have the serializable annotation on it. So, Igor, how do you feel if I run with this one? I don't know if I'll get it right, but I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, give it a shot. So just for the context, so the serializable annotation is annotation that is used by Kotlin serialization library.
Yeah, Spring has a couple different ways of doing that, but that's the serializer I'm using here. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. And like everything else, I'll start with consist. And for this one, I'm saying everything all the classes in that models package should have that serializable on it. So I'm going to do scope from package. Does that sound right?
Yes, that sounds right.
And then classes, I guess, from here.
Yes, go with classes. Exactly.
And then from here, I can just assert directly on this. Looks like has annotation of is probably going to be the most helpful for what we're doing here.
Yes, this is the one.
All right, I think that's right. Is that looking right?
Looks right.
I'll give it a run and we'll find out.
Right.
Okay, great. We got the failure. So I'll just come in here, add that annotation, and we'll run it again. All right, and so I think the last thing that we could do here is you might have noticed how I've got the different layers of this project in different packages. And sometimes some people like to do these in different modules. So like you have a separate Gradle module or Maven module for each layer. But here I've just got them in packages. But I'd still like to make sure that we're respecting the boundaries. So for example, that we don't have something from the model layer calling into the controller, or say the controller calls directly down into the data layer, that kind of thing. And looks like Konsist has some architecture verification that it can do, right?
Yes, in fact, Konsist has two types of checks. So all of the checks that we have written for so far are structural checks. So we verify if the code structure is compliant with certain rules. But we can also verify the application architecture, especially those kind of virtual layers defined as a package within a module. So to write this test, probably we should create a new file. We'll call it Konsist architecture test. So as before, we start with Konsist. So this is the common pattern across the framework, and we create a scope from a project. However, this time we can obviously query things if we would like to perform this architectural check on a smaller piece of code. However, this time we want to check entire project, and we will use a dedicated assert called assert architecture. So this one is a bit longer in terms of code, but it's quite easy to get. So there are two distinct steps here. So first of all, we will define the layers. And second of all, we will set the dependencies between those layers. So if we open the packages right in our project, right? So we see distinct layers for controller, data, model, and service, right? So we'll create a layer instance for every one of those. So let's start with the controller. And we need to pass two arguments. So one is the name of the layer. This is mostly used to get a clear error logs. And the other argument is the package that represents that layer. So in our case we have story.controller. And obviously we'll use two dots at the end to make sure that all of the classes in sub-packages are included as well. So then we will add another layer, data, right? Data, right? And two more, the model layer, and finally the service layer. Basically, this approach, helps to develop with this feature per module approach, where entire feature is contained within one module, but this module has distinct layers. So because we written this test using project scope in mind, this would work for all modules in the project. So currently we have only one, which is called a story service. However, if you would add following modules, those rules would all be applied there. Okay, so we defined our layers. So now is the time to define the dependencies between these layers. So what dependencies do we want to guard here?
Well, let's see. The controller layer should depend on the service layer and the models.
So we can say controller layer depends on models, and which was the other one?
The service layer.
So this will be due for controller layer. What else?
Let's see. Next, I guess we'll just step into the next layer, which would be the service layer. So we could say the service layer depends on, again, it depends on the models, and then also on the data layer.
Did that, and probably we can do that.
I guess the data layer would come next, and that one should really just depend on the models.
Okay. So I imagine the model layer doesn't depend on anything, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Is there a way to assert that as well?
Yep. Depends on nothing.
Yeah. It looks like you have functions and properties for a lot of different things.
Yeah, we really try hard to to help with all of the cases that we can think of. So we are ready.
Yeah, that's great. So I think that should do it. And I'm hoping that this one's actually going to pass the first time, because I don't think I've got anything that violates those rules. So I'll go ahead and give it a run here. Hey, all right, that worked.
So maybe let's try to break something.
Yeah, you want to break something?
Yeah, let's
see.
something.
I'm going to go to the controller, story controller, and instead of calling into the story service, I'm going to do the data store directly here. And then I guess we wouldn't be able to do any of the sorting. So I'll just do data store dot all. And now we're skipping a layer. So we're jumping straight from the controller to the data layer, and that should hopefully break our test. Let's see what happens. Hey, all right. We get some good description here too. Controller layer depends on data layer. Imports. Yeah, that's nice. You can jump to see exactly where that import is.
Yeah, this was our intention, to make those errors, not only readable and kind of provide a human format, but also, put links every weekend. So it's all about, speed of development, right? You see the issue, you want to click on the link and open it. And many tools kind of give you halfway there.
Yeah, I love how detailed these messages are, and the fact that you can jump straight to the offending code is really cool. Well, that I believe that covers everything that I had in mind here, unless you can think of any particularly egregious offensive code that I've written here that you'd like to also test.
I think we should be good for now.
That sounds good.
This is just a start to get to get everyone the idea about the possibilities. So I'm really hoping that the community will surprise me here.
I bet there are a lot of use cases that you've seen besides the ones that we did here today. I'm sure you've got a lot of others that have come up. And when I've looked at the documentation website, it's actually, you've done a really good job of including like a variety of snippets that you might want for a range of different kinds of projects that you might work on. So yeah, maybe you want to share some of that?
So within our documentation, we have like multiple sections. So for example, we have those snippets that we mentioned. So, we have snippets for general coding practices that are applied to all projects, things that are specific to Android, like, verification of view models, and, verification of Android logging, Jetpack Compose. We also have few snippets that are dedicated to Spring. So for example, tests that we haven't covered here, we want to make sure that every class with control annotation has controller suffix, or it resides in a controller package, which I think is another nice one to have. We also have some snippets to verify if every class has a test, or then we later realized it should be every class besides data class and value classes. So we refine things as we go. We have KTest snippets. We have some architecture snippets that you have seen. Stuff that would be helpful for a clean architecture, like layer separations, like format of the use case, the Kotlin serialization snippets that we just discussed, and even snippets for library author creations that cover like more advanced cases, like every declaration needs to have KDoc documentation.
That's great. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's actually, we use it in Konsist. We realized like, we want to document everything, but we also want to make sure that if method is returning a value, it should have a return tag within KDoc documentation. On top of that, we have extensive starting guide that describes how to start this with Kotlin Gradle, Kotlin Groovy, Maven, and how to proceed forward. We also cover some more advanced cases like defining a custom Konsist test source set for your project to isolate those tests, or defining another module. Documentation also covers ways of suppressing those tests, because obviously with existing code base not everything will be perfect. We also have extensive chapter on the debugging Konsist tests, to get the idea how to go through the code and how to understand what's going on there. So especially at the beginning, where you will be trying to figure out how Konsist works, this would be extremely helpful for you to take a look at. From more advanced topics, we have those dynamic tests, which is a really cool concept. So if you run a test and it fails, you only see failing tests. However, there is a way to split like every single check into separate tests. So this way, if let's say you have 100 use cases and only one is invalid, you will see exact place like where this failed, and you will also see it in the test reports. So it's very helpful for larger projects. This is it. Like the documentation is extensive. We are refining this almost every day. We try to add new things, cover more stuff, clarify concepts. So I exported this documentation last week, and it has over 100 pages in PDF. So
Wow. I was going to say, you've got a lot more documentation here than I've seen on projects that have been around for years. So you've done a really good job of assembling documentation for this and answering a lot of different questions.
yeah, I'm trying to write a library that I would use myself, like to keep my high quality standards. So that's why you see a lot of small touches here and there that you would say, oh wow, nice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, it sounds like the community has really already started latching onto this project quite a bit. And at this point in kind of the stage that Konsist is in right now, what's the best way for the Kotlin community to support you? Are you like looking for pull requests? Or are you just looking for feedback on use cases? Or
Yeah, so we actually have multiple ways that you can support us. So first of all, like we need to know that you like the tool. So drop us a message on Slack. We have dedicated Slack channel on the Kotlin Lang Slack. You can chat with us there, ask questions. We'll give you support. You can present your ideas, show us your snippets. Another way to support us is obviously give us a GitHub star. Why not? This is something that fuels our passion. But you also can contribute to the code. So actually, we have dedicated contributing section, and to be honest, this is the one that probably needs the most work in this documentation. But we have recently shared our Jira board, where basically you can review our backlog of tickets, and we have a dedicated label called Contribute Opportunity for you to grab the ticket that we may need help with. So if you click this link from the documentation, so we have a dedicated list of tickets for all the external contributors to grab. So obviously, you can work on anything as long as you are aligned with us, because some tickets, depends on other tickets. Some tickets depends on our release plans. So we wanna kind of make sure that if we give you something, it will be done. And that's why those, I would say, introduction tickets are kind of not obligatory. Those are all the things that we could do to make Konsist better, that they are not block us in any ways. And we already have multiple external contributors who are contributing quickly by helping us improving the Konsist code base.
well, that sounds great. I'm excited, and I think I've seen a lot of value out of this just from looking at the project, and I think there are a lot of great ways that this can be used that maybe developers haven't even come up with yet. And so I'm looking forward to seeing over the next, next 3 to 6 months, especially to see what kind of use cases the community comes up with for you. You have anything else to share on this one, Igor? You feel like we covered it pretty well today?
I think we covered the idea pretty well, and I imagine many developers will appreciate that. Because we all worked on different qualities of code base. So this is definitely the tool that will help you to improve the code base. But unlike Kotlin and Detect, it doesn't really give you the predefined rules, because those rules at code structure level and architecture level are usually project driven. So you have a flexibility to tailor this to your needs and make it perfectly fit for your project. So whatever you wanna do, use cases that exist in a given package, or they have this public method that has operator modifier, and doesn't have a state. It's kind of everything is there within Konsist. You will be able to standardize your code base. And this is extremely useful because when you jump between different pieces of code, like we have this expectation as developers that one view or view model or controller look exactly the same as the other, and this gives us this ability to go faster in the code base, because if we are familiar with one aspect of the code base and then we jump into another by working on another feature, we instantly understand what's going on, and then you cannot put price on that. So I really hope that this tool will serve the community, and I'm hoping that as a community we'll be able to to make this tool better, to make this tool evolve and benefit from this tool.
That sounds great. Well, Igor, thank you so much for spending time with me today and working through this project together. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had fun as well. Thank you.
Well, with that, we're going to wrap up. To everyone out there watching, thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.